Chapter 15. Dan sat in silence for a while. He crossed his arms over his chest and seemed to reflect on everything Nicholas had told them. He felt a certain detachment from reality. This was definitely not a hallucination or even a wakeful dream. It was real as real can be, yet there was an eerie feeling about it all. Nicholas's last sentence, before he left the apartment, echoed in Dan's mind. "I'm only transmitting the messages I received from God," he had said. He stood up and kicked Gustavo on the foot. "Hey you asleep?" Gustavo shook himself out of his own reveries and looked up at Dan, bleary-eyed. He straightened up, but remained seated. "No, not really, but that talk with Nicholas was probably the strangest experience I've ever had in my life." "You can say that again," Dan chortled. "I can't get over what he said." "You mean the thing about transmitting messages from God?" "Yeah, and about me landing in my past because I wanted subconsciously to be here." "Oh, that explains a lot, doesn't it? You were already reliving a past incident when you forgot to hold hands with your wife and landed further back in your life." Gustavo looked up at Dan again, frowning this time. "But if I were to tell the story to anyone, they'd think I'd gone completely mad. Completely crazy." He got up and stretched his arms wide and above his head. "I think it's time for bed." He turned and walked into the direction of Fabio's room, then changed his mind and swung on his heels. "So you sure it's okay for me to sleep in your friend's bed?" Dan nodded, stepping beside Gustavo. "He wouldn't mind at all, and I'm sure he'd give you his bed if he were here." He patted him on the back. "You go ahead and make yourself at home, okay?" Okay. Oh, what about breakfast? Do we need to get anything from 7-Eleven, you think?" "Well, let's have a look at the fridge and cupboards. Maybe we still have something edible in there," Dan suggested, taking Gustavo by the arm and pushing him toward the kitchen. When he stood in front of the fridge, he froze. "What's happening?" Gustavo asked. "Did you remember something else?" Yes, I did, Gustavo. There was a photograph on the fridge's door. I was standing beside a woman looking at the camera. That's probably a photograph of your wife." "No, Gustavo," Dan cut in. "Malou has black hair." He stopped and stared into space. "How did I know that?" "Well, I'd say that Nicholas did more than give you a name. He's probably transmitted a message to your brain." He guffed. "I don't believe I'm saying this. You know that? I told you this is all too weird for this old soldier." "Yeah, but then, who's this woman I saw in the photograph?" Dan asked, finally opening the fridge door. There were eggs and a packet of bacon, some vegetables on the lower shelf, a carton of milk, and one of juice in the door. "Everything a man needs for a hearty breakfast," he remarked, shooting a glance at Gustavo. "And there must be some bread somewhere?" Gustavo pointed to the counter. There was a bread box on it, near the toaster. "I tell you, you guys are so organized it looks like you've been brought up by a matron or something." Dan turned from the counter and stared at Gustavo. "Not a matron, Gustavo, but me and my sister." He stopped again. "That's it!" he shouted. "The woman in the photo, it's my sister, Nicole." His face turned pale suddenly, and he seemed about ready to faint when Gustavo grabbed Dan by the arm and led him to one of the kitchen chairs and sat him down. "I think you've got enough recollecting for one day, Dan." He patted his cheek gently. "Let's get you to bed before you fall in a heap, okay?" Dan shook his head. "Something has happened to her, Gustavo. She's not with us anymore." Gustavo looked up at the ceiling. "You know I love you, God. But would you give my friend a break for a bit? He's not moving at your speed, you know." "I'd say you're right," Nicholas said from behind them. "You better get to bed, young man," he added, approaching Dan, who had his elbows on his knees and was holding his head between the palms of his hands. "Just tell me what happened to her, Nicholas," Dan pleaded. "She's dead, isn't she?" "Not at the moment, she isn't. But when you find your way back into your future, with Malou's help, you'll be able to know everything that happened to her." "And may I ask what you're doing here again?" Gustavo asked, looking at their messenger fixedly. "But aren't you the one who called me?" Nicholas replied, cracking a smile. "Good Lord, don't tell me he's listening to me too." "Yes, Gustavo, you're on his radar, as you guys say, for the time being anyway, and that until Malou gets here." "You mean I'm the babysitter?" "Let's just say that you've been appointed to watch over Dan, and so that he doesn't bang his head again, all right?" Okay, Nicholas, I get it, and you've got me for the duration." As they were walking toward the end of the esplanade, Malou noticed another road sign that, again, was emblazoned with the face of a Seminole Indian. She stopped and looked up at it. "You know, Stefano, this face is strangely similar to our old Seminole man in Pahokee." "I think you're right, Mum," Daniel agreed, staring at the sign. "Maybe we should look for these signs along the way. They might be some sort of guide or indication that we're going in the right direction," Gabby added, she too looking at the road sign. "Very good, Gabby," Damianos remarked from behind the four of them. "But I also suggest that you notice what the sign itself indicates." "Such as the name of the next town or the number of miles we've already covered?" Stefano asked. Precisely, and I would suggest that some of the signs will give you a choice of path to take. You know, Damien, as this sounds much more difficult than the tasks Dan performed during the first journey, Malou remarked, because during our first trip you always transported us where we needed to go. We never had to decipher our point of landing, so to speak. You're right, Malou, and if I was aware of your ultimate destination in time, I would be the first one to take you there. However, as it is, we're searching for the right path to take, nothing more, nothing less. How long do you think we've got to continue walking on this esplanade? Daniel asked. As long as it takes for you to find the clues leading to your next stop. What about Chippewa? Couldn't he come and give us a hand? Malou asked suddenly. Her children's eyes turned to her at once. Who's Chippewa, Mum? Gabby asked. That's the actual dream catcher, Malou replied, touching her pendant. It felt warm, such as it did when she touched it in the hospital after Dan's accident. That's it, isn't it, Damienos? He laughed out loud. Yes, Malou, it is. I was wondering how long it would take you to figure this out. You see, the moment you saw the first road sign, you recognized the fact that we were in Florida, and then you followed the one-way sign leading you south of here. Ultimately, when you realized that the old Indian's face was none other than Chippewa, I knew you were on the right track. But what about our amulets, then? Daniel asked. Don't they have something to do with guiding us? They will, Malou answered for Damienos. You see, Chippewa and the road signs will give us directions, but our own dream catchers will enable us to communicate with Dad. Really? Gabby practically screamed in her mother's ear. Why didn't you say so earlier, Mum? Because I've only remembered about it when I touched my amulet just now. But I don't think it's like your cell phones, or maybe they're very much like it. We're probably going to be in Dad's vicinity before we're able to talk to him. You mean we don't have enough bars right now to contact him, is that it? Daniel asked. Besides which, Damienos added, you're not yet in the right time frame. Does that mean we've got to find the year in which he landed first before we could call him? Yes, Gabby, I'm afraid that's your second step. And when are we going to turn the next page of the book then? Stefano asked. When you reach your destination, Damienos replied. A few minutes later, they arrived at the end of the esplanade, and immediately Malou noticed the sign. It said, Fort Lauderdale Embarcadero. Damienos, does that mean we've got to go to the marina? No, not a marina, Gabby. The quay where you can embark on your yak. But I thought you said... And before Gabby could agree, Damienos snapped his fingers to transport the five of them aboard a luxurious cabin cruiser. Good God, Damienos, why don't you give us some warning? So unnerving, Malou said, but smiling up at their cat. I'm sorry, Malou, but Damien and Salangi are waiting for you down below. He pointed to the stairs leading to the inside of the boat. You mean we've reached our first destination? Daniel asked, visibly surprised. Yes, and I thought you would be pleased, aren't you? Daniel only nodded in reply and followed his siblings and mother down to the interior cabin. There they found Salangi and Damien seated on the couch facing a small table. Welcome to your second etape. Wow, you speak French too? That's amazing, Daniel said. I'm sorry, I should have said the second leg in your journey, Damien said, smiling at the children as they took a seat beside their mother and facing the angelic couple. Do you speak many languages then? Gabby asked. Yes, you see we have quite a few souls in our charge, and not all speak English, Salangi explained. And sometimes we forget who speaks what, she giggled at the thought. But for now, why don't we just concentrate on English writing, okay? She laid the book on the table. Thank you, Salangi. You have no idea how glad we are to see you both, Malou commented. It's been such a difficult process, not only to find this place, but for me to realise how we were going to accomplish our task. When you deal with matters that concern space and time, nothing is ever simple, Malou, Damien added. Yet I think you'll find this next leg, he chuckled, in your journey much more pleasant and recalling many enjoyable events to your attention. All right then, Malou said, looking down at the book. Shall I open it? By all means, dear, go ahead, Salangi replied. Here goes it. When she lifted the cover, they all saw the pages flipping to the 27th pages of the volume as if by magic. Oh my, I wish I had one of these automatic bookmarks on the side of my bed. I keep losing my page. Perhaps we could get you a new bookmark when we get home, Gabby said, cracking a smile. Right, thanks. But for now, let's see what it says, okay? Everyone nodded, and Malou then began reading aloud. Leaving the fort behind and keeping the key in sight will guide you to your destination. Be sure, however, not to travel farther than you are called to do. Here we go again, Stefano remarked. It's another riddle. But there's something different about this one, Gabby said, peering down at the writing. Did you notice? She turned her face to her mother. The two words fort and key are capitalized this time. See? Look, Mum. Yes, you're right, Malou replied, putting her index finger on each of the words in turn. See, Stefano? Okay then, let's copy the words exactly as they are, Gabby said, taking her notebook out of her bag again. As she lifted the next page of the pad, she shouted, Wow, they're already transcribed. She showed the pad to Stefano. See? I'll be damned, Daniel said, looking at the pad from over his sister's shoulders. That's so neat. He looked at their angels. I guess we won't need any laptop to take notes in school where you are, will we? He added jokingly. Damien and Solangi exchanged a smile. I think we better go and meet you when you reach your next point of landing then, Solangi said, rising from the couch and making her way to the stairwell, Damien in tow. Good luck, he said, turning his head before disappearing.